Hello there, it's Carrie Rhodes here. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and a new paper crafting video. Today I am playing with 3D embossing folders, actually one to be specific, but you can use these ideas and ways to use your 3D embossing folders the same way I have with this embossing folder. A lot of these are easy to do with 3D embossing folders because of the extra depth and texture that you get with them. So I'm going to share some ways to use it and some techniques, and hopefully you can use them in your craft room today. This is the 3D embossing folder I'm using. It's called Adorning the Trees. It's from Spellbinders, and it happens to be their 3D embossing folder of the month for July 2023. Of course, like I said, you can use these with other embossing folders, and I'll leave a link to the 3D club kits below. So let's start out with mirror paper. This is from Tonic. It is a metallic type paper. It's got a white back on it. The metallic side is on the front, so I made sure to put that on the front of my embossing folder, the side with the logo. Next, you want to make sure you know how to do 3D embossing folders for your machine. Now, Spellbinders happens to have a universal plate system, and it tells you right on the platform what you need to do 3D embossing folders. It also comes with helpful instructions on how to do embossing folders from other companies. So it's very cool. All right, so you can see that amazing Christmassy background there. It kind of have a Christmas in July theme at Spellbinders for their club kits this month. So what I found really cool about the mirror paper is that I could use my little sanding block and sand away some of that metallic paper and reveal the white core of the paper. And I thought that added for a very cool look. I did a similar technique on my 10 techniques with embossing folder video that's similar to this one. If you haven't seen it, it's linked for you in the description box below, so you can also check that out. Now, I just lined that up with my embossing folder and ran it through again to pop out some of the details I might have pressed down on. Next, we're going to do foil paper. So I have a piece of white cardstock and a piece of adhesive sheet. I'm sticking the two together, and then I'm going to use my Glimmer hot foil, this rainbow foil right here, to create my own paper. So I've removed the backing off of my sticky paper, and then I'm going to use this Teflon tool here to really press my cardstock into this hot foil. Now, I kind of had a big piece there I didn't use because it had some parts where the foil was scraped away. So you do want to remove this plastic coating that's over the foil, and then we are ready to run this through the embossing folder. Now, when I do 3D embossing folders, I like to run it through forward and back, and maybe even forward again to really help get that detail. But oh my word, this turned out so amazing in that rainbow foil. I haven't made very many rainbow Christmas cards, but I thought it'd be super fun. Okay, next I really wanted to try glitter paper. Now, I know I'm just trying this on a lot of different papers because I just wanted to see how it would do on a 3D embossing folder, because they press into the paper so much. They really mold the paper, and sometimes the paper can crack. So I wanted to test it out. So this is Arteza white glitter paper. It does not have any iridescent shine to it. It's just like clear glitter on white. It turned out really good. I had some red, and I just want to try a scrap of it. This paper wasn't as thick, and I didn't get as good of a result with the red as I did with the white. So not all paper is created equal, but you've got to play with it. You've got to try it out. Okay, let's do some vellum. This is some iridescent colored vellum from Trinity Stamps that I recently purchased or got. I'm on their design team, so I got it to try out and share with you. So I wanted to emboss with it because vellum can be really fragile at times. And I'm not gonna lie, there were some places where the embossing actually cracked the paper, but I feel like it still used this. It did overall really good. And I could, once adhering this down, you won't know that there's a crack in the paper. So that led me to thinking about using patterned paper. So I have this patterned paper. It's kind of glossy, and it looks like an alcohol inked background. Now, my friend gave this to me, and I thought this would be really cool embossed, and I do love it. It embossed the paper really well, no trouble whatsoever, but it is kind of a different texture of patterned paper. So I thought, okay, I better try this with traditional patterned paper. This is a really good quality pattern paper from Dare to Be Artsy that I'm using right here, and a lot of times when embossing, to help with the cracking of the paper, you can spritz your paper with water. So I did that here. That really helped with the cracking. Plus it's a good quality paper. But I feel the pattern made me lose the detail in the 3D embossing folder. So I did this pattern paper that was almost solid green. So I was like, why not just use solid paper? So I would say pattern paper is maybe not my favorite. But now let's move into some techniques. All right, so I am making sure I'm doing the front of the embossing folder. That's the part that presses into the paper. It's going to give me that embossed side, and I'm going to spray this with Distress Oxide spray. Now there's a lot of sprays out there. You can use any of the sprays that you have to do this. I'm using 3 different colors, and you can see I am spraying directly on to my embossing folder. Now what's cool about this is that your embossing folder is going to be squished down when it runs through that embossing machine or die cutting machine. So it's going to really help like spread the color out. So I did spritz my watercolor paper that I'm using for this technique, but I did not spray the folder itself. And so it's so cool. There's little bits that are still white in there, and I love that. So now let's do the opposite side of the embossing folder that would normally be on the back of your paper. We're going to call it the debossed side. It's kind of like letterpress, where it presses the pattern so that the paper is pushed down instead of the pattern pushed up. So I did 3 different colors in blue. I'm kind of going to keep the reds on the front of the folder, the blues on the back of the folder moving forward, so you can kind of easily tell them apart. For the most part, there's some variations in here today. Now, one thing about doing these watery, inky techniques, you're going to have to clean off your plates and you might get inky fingers, but there you can see them side by side, the embossed side in red, the debossed side in the blues, and it's just really fun. I love techniques that are a little bit messy and that aren't perfect, and that's exactly what this next one is. This is Splatter on the folder. So you can see I'm using the reds and pinks, so I'm doing this on the front side, the side with the logo, and I'm just going to splatter. I think I did 3 or 4 times of dipping it back in because it's, you know, you can see not full coverage, so I wanted to make sure I got a lot of splatters on there in my 3 different colors. These are the Distress Mica spray stains that come out seasonally from Ranger and Tim Holtz. So if you don't have them, you kind of wait for the holiday season for them to come out. Now that I did spray my watercolor paper a couple times, but did not spray the folder. So I thought, okay, let's go ahead and do this again, but this time I'll spray the folder and get those colors to run a little bit. So I'm doing the same exact Distress Mica spray stains. I don't remember the colors. I'm sure Peppermint Stick is in there, and I showed it on the screen. And then I'm also I did a few extra splatters, I think 4 instead of 3 on this one. I spritzed the folder, and then I thought I need a little more, so I spritzed it again, and I did spray the paper 1 time. Remember, spraying your paper is going to help your paper not crack, and watercolor paper does wonders in a 3D embossing folder, and I love this kind of smeary look. Watercolor paper has a little bit of like give to it. It's soft, you know what I mean? And so when you run it through a 3D embossing folder, they're just like best friends. They get along. It works. All right, so now I'm doing the back side of the folder with some blue Distress Mica spray stains and the same exact thing. I did decide to go ahead and spray the folder on this one and get that kind of smeary, it's like it's melting, like ice melting, it's dripping down. I don't know, it's very cool. I love the results on a 3D embossing folder with messy techniques, and I did a whole nother video. If you haven't seen that one, and you like these kind of inky painty techniques, there's a lot more, 10 in that other video, so it's linked for you below. All right, there you can see them all side by side. They're super fun. Now, I'm not making cards in this video, but I will be sharing cards made with these probably in my YouTube shorts or in my Instagram reels, so make sure you follow me on Instagram. I have all my things where you can find me linked for you in the description box. All right, I am trying out stamping foam from Simon Hurley for the very first time, so maybe you already know this technique, maybe you've already done it, but it's the first time for me, and I had to try it with my 3D embossing folder. So you take the foam, you heat it up with your gun. I don't even know how long, it didn't really say. and then you press your whatever you want into the foam, and it's going to pick up that pattern. Now you're going to press it on there for like 10 to 15 seconds, and you can see it presses the pattern into the foam. Then I'm going to take my Distress ink in Lumberjack Plaid and just rub it all over. Now I did find, this one I tapped it on there. I did find if you go on a circular motion with your ink pad, I like that better. I spritzed it a couple times with water, and then I picked up my paper, and I love it. I think it is so much fun. Now I had extra ink on there, so I decided let's spray it again and do another one, kind of like a second generation of stamping, and this one is my favorite. Oh my goodness, the second generation. So then when you want to remove the pattern, you heat it up again and it just disappears. And then while it's still hot, you can then take the other side of the embossing folder, the back side, the debossed side, and press that into that foam. And now we have the reverse side. And we're going to ink that up with blue this time. And again, the circular motion I like the best for inking this up. So this is gorgeous, and I think on this technique I like the back side of the folder better than the front side when doing the foam. Look at that. Isn't it gorgeous? It's so soft and pretty. And then of course there's still ink on there, so I'm going to use some watercolor paper because I used a ton of water on this. I thought I was just going to wipe it off, but I was like, no, I can't just wipe it off. I have to pick up the second generation. I loved it so much. So this is very whimsical, very loose, and there was still water on there, so I did a third one, and I like them all. I really do. I think there's some other fun things you could add to a lot of these backgrounds or just use them how they are. So the very first one on the left is the one where I swirled my stamp pad, and the middle one is the one where I tapped it. So swirling or circular motions with the ink pad on the stamping foam best. All right, so there's all of them side by side so you can see what they look like. I think I like the reverse side the best. And second generation. Oh, so pretty. Okay, let's do some watercoloring. So I'm taking my watercolors and I'm going to paint directly onto the embossing folder itself. I will tell you, after doing the front side and the back side, I like it better when I used more water. So you can see here I'm using a water brush because this is not a detailed type of watercoloring. It's very loose. You don't need to worry about getting it perfect because you really can't. You're using watercolor on plastic. It's going to bead up. It's going to spread out. So we're not going for perfection here. These are very abstract kind of techniques today. So once that is painted, then we're going to run it through with watercolor paper, and all the sizes I'm using today, except for the stamping foam, are 5x7 because these folders are so huge from Spellbinders. They're 9x6, so I can use great big backgrounds and decide later what I want to do with it. Maybe cut it down, maybe die cut it, who knows. So now I'm doing the back side, and this time went with a couple different greens, a couple different blues, but what I didn't do is use enough water. So I really wish I would have made that watercolor a little bit looser. It's very concentrated, and I like the look of it when it's looser, but still I'm enjoying this background. Don't get me wrong. There they are, all dried and side by side. I definitely like the front side of the folder, the embossed side, for this particular technique versus the debossed side, but both I do love. Now here's one I was dying to do. It's Embossing Resist. So I have an embossing pad, and you want to make sure for this technique that you have a pretty juicy pad, a well-inked pad. So I went ahead and added some ink right to my Wow embossing pad. And what I like about this is this ink pad is slow drying. And that's going to allow me to do a big piece of paper and ink up this big area. So first I am doing the front side of the folder, the embossed side. I ran that through, and now it's time to add the embossing powder. So I'm doing clear embossing powder, and I'm just going to do one corner at a time since it's such a big piece of paper. Once I get powder everywhere, I'm going to come in and melt that. And you can see that the powder is on top of the embossed images and down and around them as well. So I wasn't sure what was going to happen because it's clear, but I'm bringing in my Blending Buddy brushes and Distress ink and going right over the top of that, and you can see wherever the embossing powder is, it's resisting the ink, and that's giving me this kind of frosted look that I am in love with. I think it is absolutely fabulous. I love that kind of white shadow around things. It really gives me that frosty vibe for winter, and I'm excited to play with this and make a card with it. I think it's so very pretty, and I only use two ink colors, Tattered Rose and Lumberjack Plaid, and I love this. What do you think? I know it's a little messy, but I love that look. I don't want it to be perfect. So now let's do the same exact thing, but on the back side, so the debossed side. Same thing, just rubbing my stamp pad directly onto that embossing folder, getting it inked up everywhere, and then putting my watercolor paper on there and running it through. Actually, no, I think I just did plain white cardstock for this side, for this technique, I mean. And then once again, adding the clear embossing powder, and then we heat it up and melt that powder. Now, you can kind of see the powder, you know, you can see this kind of powdery effect, and when that powder disappears, then you know you've heated it long enough. You don't want to overheat it, or it actually kind of sinks into the paper and you're not going to be able to do the technique like you want. So now we're adding some lost shadow at the bottom, and then on the other side, pine needles. And I think this color combination, very unexpected, is so fun together. And look at this deboss side. Again, you're getting that frosty vibe, but it's in the image instead of around it. I don't know. The deboss side is also just as cool on this technique. I can't decide which one I like better because I love them both. But I think that's a really super fun technique. And it's probably one you could do with regular embossing folders and not just 3D. Although I find 3D makes it a lot easier because the images are so much more raised up, or for the backside, so much more pressed down. And so you can get a little bit more definition. So there's the two side by side. Can't decide which one I like best, so I'll pick both. All right, let's do some paper piecing. So I did this recently with the Spellbinder 3D embossing folder for June. It was one with seashells on it, and when I first started doing it, I didn't like it at all. So I decided to give it a chance, and I kept going with it. I kept adding more layers and more colors, and I really ended up liking it. And there's a technique at the very end that actually makes it work. So it kind of looks a little weird at first, but what you do is you just emboss different colors of cardstock, cut away the images that you can. Now, not all embossing folders can you do this with because they're more geometric. This one has actual images that you could cut out, but you cut out and you just paper piece it over the top. So it's kind of hard to get the cutting exactly perfect, although being 3D embossed, it's not too hard to cut them out. There's a definite edge there. So I thought I was going to leave it right here with just the ornaments being embossed, but I wasn't loving it, so I came back way later and added more. But that last step you want to do is to rerun it through the embossing folder, and it really helps press those images in and makes it look like one piece of paper. So next I'm going to cut out the little, there's like some circular pieces in this pattern, and I'm going to do those. So in this darker blue. And then again, I was like, nah, I think I have to keep going. It needs something else. So I did a darker green, and I'm going to cut out all the holly leaves and put that on there. And I really think having 4 different colors, which would include the background, is the best look for this particular folder, but I think it's a really fun and different technique to try. So also you need to note that when you glue these down, you kind of want to give it a couple minutes for the glue to dry before you run it back through your embossing folder. Otherwise, the glue can squish out. But when you reline this up, you're just kind of waiting for it to lock into place, and then you can run it through. There you can see where my glue squished out a little bit on my last 2 leaves, but I love the finished look of that background. Next, we are going to do a paint wash on the embossing folder. I'm using Distress Paint in Lumberjack Plaid. The red, you guessed it, is for the front of the folder, the embossed side. I am going to loosen the paint up a little bit with some water. I wasn't sure how I wanted to do it, but I don't think you need to loosen it up with water if you don't want to. It just depends on the look you're going for. What I was really hoping is that with this wide flat brush that I'm using, I would get some brush strokes that that would show up in my background. But it didn't really happen because remember, there's the squishing that the embossing folder does as it gets run through that die machine. So I really didn't get that. It kind of just ran together a little bit. I did spritz my watercolor paper, and I still am in love with this background now. One property of the distress paint is it is now permanent. It will not, once dry, react with anything else. So I can do anything over the top of this and the red is going to stay. It's like the paper is now that color. There's nothing I can do to alter that color. So I'm doing the back side with some blue, also distress paint, Uncharted Mariner. And I thought, oh, I'm going to do dark on the ends and kind of lighter in the middle, and maybe I'll get this kind of ombre look for this background. No. I spritzed my paper 2 times, ran it through, and no, I don't feel like the ombre-ness of it all is showing through on this background, but it's very cool on the debossed side, just as it is on the embossed side. So very cool. I think it's just a fun way to color your paper, have that little bit of white showing through. Okay, this is Arteza metallic acrylic paint. I've swatched all the colors I have out on some black cardstock, and so I thought it'd be super fun to use the fancy black, which kind of shows up golden on black cardstock. And I'm not gonna lie, I was a little afraid to put black paint on my embossing folder, but I will tell you that these embossing folders can take a beating and keep on working. I really ran them through the ringer. So as you can see, I added no water to this one whatsoever. And whoa, the gold, you could just use gold metallic acrylic paint on black paper. It is gorgeous. All right, so here's a way you can clean up your embossing folder if you're doing something like that with this little scrub brush, some soap, and I brought it back into my stamp room. It was quite wet. So that led me to another idea, which I will show you after I do this metallic acrylic paint on some regular watercolor paper and not black. So this is the Fairy Blue. I'm really getting purple vibes, and I'm not sure why on my white paper it looked more blue, but on my embossing folder and on my paper I get this grayish purple. But you know, there are purple Christmas cards, so it might be time for me to embrace this kind of silvery purple Christmas card. We'll see if I get to that. So here are my acrylic paint backgrounds. I think my favorite has to be the gold on black. I can't wait to do that. Okay, so remember that super wet embossing folder? I was like, oh my word, if I only had an ink blended background to collect this water, I would run it through. So I took my Distress Oxide pads and I just rubbed them right on the paper super fast. I'm like, I got to get to this water in the embossing folder. Oh my word, this is such a good idea. So let's see if it's a good idea. Here's the wet embossing folder with all the water in it. I'm putting in my ink smeared background instead of ink blended, and I'm running it through. Now I had barely any white on there, but you can see I've got the oxidized areas and I have darker areas, and this paper was very, very wet. So I set it with my heat tool, dried it up, and that's what it looks like, all dry. It was the fastest background. So I decided, let's do it again, because you know I had to wash it after I did the black paint. I had to wash it after I did the blue paint. So I did the back side, the debossed side, with some blue and green distress ink, and it's really cool. This one I did a lot more streakiness and less ink coverage, and I like that look better with less ink on the paper. But wow, so much fun just seeing what can I throw on this embossing folder. I mean, look how many backgrounds I made. That's just the plain white one, but I can do stuff with that too, like I did in my 10 techniques video. Most of those start with the paper already embossed and then add to it, but that rainbow foil paper is so cool. I love that one. And I've got the glitter paper, the vellum that's iridescent. Oh, so cool. The patterned paper. But like I said, the patterned paper that is more patterny, it's just not my favorite. It's not my favorite. So we'll see. I could maybe add to that, do something else with it. But the splatter I loved, getting very retro Christmas with that pink and red. The splatter was really fun. I love splattering, so I really enjoyed that one. I also loved spraying the folders directly. I felt like that's such a quick and easy technique, although it can be slightly messy. You could probably get away with less spritzes than I did. Spray it less. The stamping foam I think is extraordinary. I love it. Definitely going to be playing with the stamping foam more often. It's been sitting on my shelf for a little while and I'm so glad I pulled it out for this video. The watercoloring, more water, looser paint, it gives me happier results. Yeah, but I did love that. Paper piecing. It's a little more time intensive than some other techniques, but I think it's a fun result. The Embossing Resist is super duper cool. I feel like it's one of those papers you're going to look at and be like, how did they do that? You know, acrylic paint, fun. If you like painting, I thought it was cool, especially the black with the black paint that's actually gold. Oh my goodness. You can see some of the brush strokes in there, by the way, which I loved. I think that one is really cool. Will make for a very elegant Christmas card. And then we've got the Wet It. Just like wet that embossing folder, put something inky through there that reacts with the water. It's so much fun. So thank you for stopping by. Please let me know in the comments below if you learned something that you are going to try with your embossing folders. I would love to hear it. And of course, if you have any questions, let me know. And I will see you guys all again very soon on the next video. Happy stamping. Bye.